Morning, all. I hope we are all having a good week. We'll talk a bit later about someone who maybe not having a good week or a good day, but we'll certainly talk about something. This week, we're going to present to you what we presented at the Recruitment Expo back in October. We were talking about taking on the big recruiters and winning. And we started to talk about how small SME recruiters in the marketplace can start to actually look at a different style of recruitment strategy. So to give you some stats, I don't always sort of give stats on this, but I'm going to give some stats what I've pulled out. Of the 42.3 billion contribution to the UK economy, this was achieved through contract and temp, of which 37 billion was that contract and temp billings, and 4.5 was perm. The industry in the UK placed just over 1 million perm placements, and this is the stats from 2019, 2020, only slightly lower than the year before. Obviously, 2020 had a bit of a different year because of COVID. And at any one time, we are just short of 1 million workers out every day on temporary and contract assignments. Now, a large percentage of those placements are made via RPO, and according to ABSCO in 2018, the RPO market and the MSP market accounted for around about 30% of every placement made in the UK. Grant Thornton's did a really big global report on it, and he said the global recruitment process outsourcing market is now valued in US dollars at $5.4 billion, and that was 2020, and they expected that to grow by 18% by 2022, which will give that global RPO market around about $20 billion. The UK and the US market accounts for 2/3 of that. The MSP, the master service providers, expanded up until 2020 to a global reach of $135 billion globally. So what it says is there's a huge market out there, and there's a huge market that we need to sort of capitalize on. And the market is split into three defined areas: the global market, a regional market, and the national market. And the top 10 providers in the US and the UK account for around about 70% of the global market. So it says there's low barrier to entry in the sort of small regional or national market, where it's a single country, they're relatively low barriers to entry, which means small players are now taking more and more market share from the big players. So we've got to start to think, well, we can look at that, where the global market, which is multi-country, has more significant barriers to entry, and that is dominated by those real top 10 providers across the UK, etc. But one thing's interesting. This is where we've got to start to jump on. Repeat contracts have increased by 75% over the last 5 years, which means it's gone from 75% to 85% actually repeat the contract. And usually what happens is the lowest repeat is after that first year, and then the second and third year it starts to repeat even more. So it says most people take on an RPO or an MSP, but then drop it after the first year for quality of service. But if they get through that first year with a good quality of service, then it tends to extend. 85% of them extend. So this week, I'm joined by Paul Jacobs. Paul has a slight problem, which I'm sure he's going to be happy to tell you about before we kick off. But he's got a slight problem. Heather is sunning herself on a beach somewhere, and Mr. Sharp and Mr. Pye are out on client site. So again, this is going to be the usual one where we're not asking questions to each other and talking about questions. We're going to present what we normally present, but we want you to interject, ask any questions that you want to work from there. So, Mr. Jacobs, I'm going to hand this manfully over to you for the first slide. So, taking on the big recruiters and winning.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Howard. And hello, everybody. One of the issues I've got right now is that I was in the middle of a conversation with a client who is on this right at this moment, and in the middle of this conversation, I had the most ferocious nosebleed. So I had to I had to leave the meeting and park myself over a sink for a period of time. So if you can see this handkerchief, it's a clean one. But if you see me disappearing, you'll know the reason why. Hopefully that will be fine. The second reason is apparently my internet is unstable, so we're going to have one of those days today, I think. Look, let me get straight into the content here. as you can see, we're talking here about product development, and Howard's completely right. This is all about taking on, as he calls it, the big boys, taking on the big recruiters and winning. And I think sort of coming away from this positioning and this mindset that as SMEs, we can't go in and offer similar services, or even, let's be honest, better services than some of the larger corporates. But I think it really starts here. And you can see on this slide, what we're saying here is you kind of start with the end in mind. What I mean by that is that you start with thinking about your vision and why you do what you do. We've often talked about that, the why are you doing things, the why question. And I think this is very relevant here. How are you going to separate your business, what you do, from your competitors? And I know it's a cliche, and we often sort of roll our eyes when we talk about cliches, but there is an important point here, and that is build your 3-year vision, and that's got to be based on your vision and values. I was talking to a client first thing this morning prior to the nosebleed, and we were talking about positioning, and his concern was, when I'm on a PSL, I'm being forced to act and behave in the same way as everybody else on that PSL. I don't really want to behave in that fashion. I think his point is valid. You want to be building your own characteristics, your own unique style. You need to be in a position with your clients where your values, your vision is something that they feel aligned to. I mean, there's an important point here, and you can see it, people plan, the who. You can't take your business anywhere without making sure that you have your people on board. In the end, it's all about our people. And we know that in recruitment, there's something in the order, I think Perkbox, Howard said this, is something like 43% attrition rate in our industry, which is shameful, really. None of us are very proud of that. There are lots of recruitment businesses that have a much lower attrition rate, and unfortunately, a number that will be much higher than 43%, which is a real concern. What we need to understand is that the people that we take on have the same vision, the same values, behaviors as those that we have as the owners of our businesses, as the leaders of our business. We need to be recruiting on values and behaviors, as well as, I've often talked about this, emotional intelligence. So making sure that people are aligned to values and the mission of the business is absolutely important. And I think that gives SMEs a great advantage over sometimes the larger corporates, who typically, and I am generalizing here, have much higher churn rates than the smaller organizations. So the thing here is to be thinking about what you're offering. If you're going to take on the big agency market, you're going to have to be different and create that differential, because you're going to need to stand out from the competition. Being nimble and agile, being small and courageous, offering a unique style of service, making it personalized, is very, very important. But there you have it on the slide. It's kind of working backwards from where you want to be in 3 years' time, looking at vision and values, knowing your business plan, making sure people are aligned to your organization, and then obviously looking at the products and services that you're going to be providing.
It's interesting when you start to think about that, Paul. We've presented, months ago about the tangible assets and the intangible assets that you can grow in your business. And if someone came to value your business, they'd look at these assets. And without building some of these assets out, you never grow and scale to the point where you can actually compete with the bigger players. And I think we've got to start to look at some of the assets that we have and how they are far more they impact us far better than they do the bigger players, because our assets are generally stronger than the biggest players. So if you look at specialism and strength of your brand, and that will help you outrank the big players. When we start to think about the big players, their brand is generally niche because they are such a huge organization. They have so many niches, and therefore their niche brand is significantly weaker than yours. So if you're in a niche marketplace, if your brand is recognized for quality within that niche, etc., it's your experience of your clients, and they would rather deal with a local brand player than a large generalist. So what we've got to start to think is that our brand becomes really important to us, because our brand can be far more powerful than the bigger players. The next thing we've got to start to understand is what our profit trends of business are. And from each individual client base, we've got to think how quickly and efficiently we can identify target clients, which we're going to talk about a lot through this presentation. So it's about looking at your profit trends, which clients are likely going up, which clients are likely to pipeline, which clients are sort of shrinking away, which clients do we actually approach, and why do we approach them? The other thing we start to look at then is our modus operandi, and that's key. And we're going to talk a lot about this again all the way through this business, where we feel that we probably do the same things that a big player does, but it's how they package them and what they package them like, which makes them selling that MSP, master vendor, talent acquisition type service really, really well. So in the main, SME players usually have better and more up-to-date tech that allows them to be more nimble and agile than the bigger player agencies in the marketplace. And I've worked for quite a number of the big agencies. I've been in to sort of see them since I've left, etc. And they usually have quite outdated technology. It usually isn't updated as quick as normal technology because there's so many people that they're using it that they daren't sort of move things along. So your technology is usually quicker. And this is important because this is where we extract data from. And as yet, we know the big players use and collate data, but your data is going to be cleaner, it's going to be more defined, and it's going to be more precise for your end clients. And because you're small and nimble, you're able to farm that data more often and take it to market, but be more market-led, more geographical-led or niche-led. And therefore, you can supply your clients with this data more often and more precise about their market rather than the big players who provide more generic data about the marketplace. The other thing that we've got to think about is there's a huge disconnect between the big branches and the head offices of the big players. And what I mean by that is the big branches are like the SME market. They're out doing spot business and they love opening spot business. However, when they start to look at a big client and come across a big client, because head office is monitoring all their business, what the head office often does is they come in and they take that big client away from the office because they can see the opportunity. The head office is where generally they have some truly great talent. And what they actually do is use that talent to actually go out and deliver and ensure that the company turns a profit, even on low paid work. However, and this is where the difference comes, we've all worked for, for companies that have come through an MSP or an RPO. And what we tend to find is that we outperform the main client. Why do we outperform the main agency that's in there? Is because generally to keep their costs low, they put low market recruiters in there, people new into the marketplace, where we as an SME marketplace, we usually have the top recruiters. We have people who are very engaged in our business. And so the main expert recruiters deal with these clients. So they're far better trained, have more market knowledge, and are more engaging, which means to the businesses that you're dealing with, you get a better product. So it's about sort of saying, can we compete on that front? And yes, we can. One thing we need to learn from the big players is the SME market treats big players like spot business. And they sign us up, and we sign them up on 30-day rolling contracts. We've talked about this quite a lot, where the big players all have on fixed end date contracts. They know what the client's going to spend over a certain period of time, and they lock them in for 2, 3, 4 years. We need to understand there's a huge potential in that by locking clients down, because it means that we're always at the mainframe of the client. We've got to think about margin quality and attrition. The big players love a low margin, but due to their high attrition, they can never provide a consistent service, which damages the quality of the client relationship. And that reflects in the fact that after year one, quite a lot of companies move to another master vendor because of the quality of service that they're getting. So when taking on the big players, we've got to think about the stability of your team. We know having a stable team needs an increase in strength of the client relationship from top to bottom, but it all means there's an opportunity to win business and retain it at a higher margin and a higher fee, because the clients start to see the value and prospect of working with a true business partner. And this is where we now need to understand what those partnerships actually look like.
Okay, thanks, Howard. So where to start? What you can see here is a slide that talks about the client life cycle. And it kind of denotes our positioning with clients. And there's a reason why we've put these into separate sort of lozenges, for want of a better expression: contact, acceptance, trust, loyalty, and advocacy. Because what we want you to do is to think really hard about your clients and understand by, I mean, it could be as simple, frankly, as getting some post-it notes and getting those post-it notes and writing up what we've put there on this slide and saying which of our clients, where are we with each of these clients? Are we into contact mode? So basically, we're just getting to know people. They don't know us, so the trust between us and them is pretty low. We haven't met them in all probability. We are seen by them as the way they view every other agency. We are going to be used in a very reactive fashion. They'll chuck us vacancies at the same time as they chuck vacancies in other direction, and so on and so on. So are we at that contact point, or are we at the next level of acceptance? So we're getting to know each other a bit. That will be based upon ongoing relationships. We've spent time talking to them. Maybe at this point, we're beginning to get to a point where we're meeting them. I often talk about the trusted advisor triangle. This is very similar. So you're trying to move yourself away from the pack, away from the way that you're viewed, as I mentioned, by the employer as one of many agencies. You're now into a position where you've met them. There's a distinction between you and the others. They're getting to know you, they're getting to trust you. And the consultant or the consultants that are working are becoming much more accepted. This is now the point at which we're starting to build trust. And trust, of course, underpins everything that we do with our best employer clients. Everything that we achieve is built upon trust with our candidates and our clients. Trust is the underpins the relationships we have. And this is why when you're very much at the base of that trusted advisor pyramid, when you're in that contact phase, the truth is that they don't trust you because they don't know you. And as far as they're concerned, you're just one of many agencies they use, and they're just going to send roles to you and wait for the CVs to come back in the other direction, often duplicate CVs. This is not where we want to be. We want to build trust with clients so that we can start to leverage our positioning to get more exclusive opportunities to move towards exclusivity and retained business. This comes about, as you guys will be well aware, through a number of meetings, a number of network opportunities, even social lunches, that sort of thing, to get to a point where you're building that level of trust with the client to the extent that there's very little, if any, level of friction, as it were, between you and your client. They accept your calls, they respond to your emails, they accept your recommendations, they take on board your direction. And in fact, then we're moving away at this point from being entirely reactive, i.e. chucking CVs when we get a vacancy, to becoming proactive. We're getting closer to our clients, so we're understanding what their recruitment needs are likely to be, not just in the now, but in 3, 4 months, 6 months, a year. So we're getting much closer. This transcends into loyalty, which is what we want. We want clients to feel very strongly towards us. At this stage, when they feel loyal to us, we've moved a mile away from that reactive position we had when we first had just contact with the client. Here now we are in a position where we can start asking the client for retained exclusive business. We can upsell, we can cross-sell. We can also look at the quality of our margins, because if we're offering a customized consultative service, we should be charging more money for that service. So we are now in a place where we can land and expand. We can use the client that we know to introduce us to other people in that organization, and we're networking throughout the organization, maybe in one location, maybe in several, maybe even internationally. So we've moved from contact to loyalty, ultimately advocacy, which is where the client will recommend us to people, will recommend us to other people in the organization, and indeed at this stage, I think will invite us in. They'll talk about, the board is coming over from America, could you come and do a presentation? Can you help me with my presentation? And they'll be asking for things like surveys on salaries, a whole range of things. At this point, you can now own, inverted commas, the client. At this stage, any business that you want, you're likely to get if you ask for it. It's a life cycle. What I want you to do with each of your clients, the people you work with, get a yellow sticky and place it on one of these. Where are we with these clients? Honestly, where do we sit? Because if most of them are down in this contact area, you want to be moving them up that chain towards loyalty and advocacy. It's a really interesting exercise to do with your people. I'd advise you to have a go at it. It's quite interesting and very revealing as to where you are with your relationships.
It's hugely revealing, Paul. And I think, when we've done this on numerous clients and looked and dissected their client base, and when we start to find it, where they sometimes think that a client's in loyalty, they're actually in acceptance, and where they think they're in trust, they're actually in contact, because they haven't got all the things they need to do that. And the flip side of this is when we start to sort of build a very different one. Once you understand your client relations and what they look like, and you start to think about the strategies that your clients need, you need to assess, are you approaching the right clients with the right quality product? And this is where you look at your clients and you need to segment your requirements into individual types. You need to assess which requirements you truly make money out of and which ones are really hard to work. And this is where you become, I always class it as the comment, this is where you become customer obsessive. And this is which customers, both the candidate, the client, and your consultants, how can you impact all of those people the most? Because as a business owner, they are your customers, the candidates, the clients, and your consultants. So we look at this type, this is working to selling to your strengths. So if we look at, say, these are all different types of requirements, you put all your requirements in individual buckets. So you have a sort of, this is one type of requirement, give or take, a small percentage. This is another, this is another. So you segment them all in the buckets. And if I looked at this and I looked at, say, type A, let's say I worked, 100 jobs of type A every single year, and I work 100% of them, I place 20% of them, that creates, say, 25, 30% of my company profit. The pound note and the percentage of the deals is usually fine, but on average, I have to go into my CRM and I have to really market candidates really heavily, and I have to spend an awful lot of finding candidates, because there's a lot of these type of agencies out there, there's a lot of type of jobs out there, so the competition is really hot, hence why I'm only placing around about 20% of these people. I could then look at type D as a role, and maybe on type D I'm only getting 25 jobs a year, but I'm working on those 25 jobs, I'm placing 90% of those 25 jobs, and they're giving me 10% of my company profit. And so I start to think, because the pound notes and the values are bigger, and I have a reasonable number of candidates on my database, because the market isn't as heavy in this marketplace, I can suddenly realize that my consultants are spending a far more profitable time working type D than working type A. However, what we don't do is suddenly stop working type A, because we can now start to glean this data. We can understand that we're only filling a 20% of the jobs that we take on. What can we go back to the client with? What can we learn? Where's the blocker? Why aren't we filling more requirements in that fashion? And it could be because the client's got 4 or 5 other agencies. But if we were selling a master vendor service to them, or a talent advisory service to them, could we take that 20% to 60, 70, 80%, because we're doing slightly different things for them? So it's about understanding the marketplace and understanding your strengths. And sometimes we get blinded by the volume of roles that come in, even though we only fill a small percentage of those roles, compared to the roles that we might not get the large volume of, but we fill a higher percentage. So what we're talking about is maximizing our consultants' time and maximizing our clients' capabilities, but also then coming back to the client and talking to the client about how we can improve their recruitment process, that then improves our profitability overall. So when we combine these two processes together, the one that Paul talked about and this one together, we're now getting a better understanding of our true client relationship, which means we can start to look at our return on investment versus time and effort in that client cycle.
So basically, guys, what we have here is, and a lot of you will know this is known as the Boston Matrix. Check it out. It talks about rising stars, question marks, cash cows, and dogs. Not particularly pleasant expressions, some of them, I think. But the truth is that what we want to be doing is put these swim lanes, Howard called them swim lanes to me earlier. It's a new one on me. I had no idea what a swim lane was, since my ability to swim too many lengths these days is rather limited, I would suggest. But that's what these are. I'm going back to that contact, acceptance, trust, loyalty, advocacy marker that I asked you to look at with your current clients. Where do these clients sit with you in relation to your relationship with those organizations? Are you at contact, acceptance, trust, loyalty, or advocacy? We want to be moving from trust to advocacy. Now, what I'd like you to also do, apart from those sticky post-its we were talking about, and understanding where you sit presently in that client life cycle, I'd also like you to think about where your clients are at in terms of the Boston Matrix. Are they rising stars? So rising stars can often be organizations that are relatively new, making a mark, going somewhere. They're interesting, they're exciting. They can often be startups. They can equally be organizations that are changing direction, shifting forward. They could be, from your perspective, an organization that started spending a small amount with you, but are now quite clearly spending more. And when you meet with them, if we're into that trust, loyalty, advocacy area, you're already understanding that they're very ambitious. They want to move forward. These are definitely organizations we want to link arms with and build long-term relationships with. I guess our question marks, and I suppose the phrase kind of says it all, are organizations where you're not really sure. Are they going to give you the opportunity to develop with them? Are they going to fade away? Are you bought into who they are, what they're doing? How much information do you have on them? Are there gaps in your knowledge about the organization? What is it you know about the organization? And is it just one person that you know in that business, or do you know many people? It's a bit unclear, it's a bit foggy, and you're going to need to do some work here to understand a lot more about the company to try and figure out whether they could indeed be a rising star. Our cash cows are the organizations that are probably not here forever and a day. I mean, we were talking earlier, Howard and I, and he gave me a good example of a client who's working with an organization right now that are involved very heavily in the COVID crisis. Well, that business is expected to continue to do very well for a period of time, but it could be argued that once, please God, the COVID situation begins to really dissipate, then that particular organization are not going to be as needy in terms of their requirements as they've been in the last 18 months. So as an example, I'm sure you've got others yourself. Who are you working with that presently you're doing very well with, extremely well with, and maybe dangerously, they occupy a high percentage of your sales, a high percentage of your turnover, but are they going to stick? In a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, will you still be working with them to the extent you are today? Can you see what's around the corner? And if it is the case that you're going to do very well with these clients for now, and that's great, you should be making plans to find other organizations to work with, because this isn't going to last forever and a day. Of course, your dogs are the companies that really and truthfully you ought to be, in all probability, walking away from. These are the companies who don't treat you with any great respect. They don't hold your services with particular high value. Maybe they're the companies that don't respond when you write to them, when you call them. Maybe they're the companies that don't pay you on time. They make life difficult for you. What I would like you to do when you're doing this exercise and you're going through this process of understanding where your relationship sits with the client, also understand in this process, what kind of client is it? Are they a rising star? Are they a question mark, cash cow, or a dog? That's the Boston Matrix. After this, by all means, go online, look at the Boston Matrix. It's really self-explanatory, and it will guide you further as to how you can start to denote where your clients sit in these swim lanes.
We've done this exercise with quite a number of clients, and there's a number of clients on the webinar today that we've done this with. And what you end up with is a wall with all your clients in the contact points, and then all segmented into their individual swim lanes. Because what that enables you to do then is start to create a true client plan. And this is where we start to differentiate, because if I said, have you got a client strategy? Most people say, yeah, I've got a client strategy. But when you start to look at your individual clients, have you got an individual client plan? So we need to start to think about that, because we need to think about what that looks like. And when we start to sort of create a client plan, we start to move into what's called Porter's 5 forces. We need to understand the 5 basic forces that threaten our clients. And that's the threat to new entry, the bargaining power of suppliers, and that's your candidates, the bargaining power of your buyer, that's your client you're working with, the threat to substitute the product or service. So what threat have we got to substitute our product or services, and what industry rivalry is actually out there? And once we start to understand that, we can start to plan properly. You need to be stringent about this planning process. Know what and how you're going to deliver to your client. So I always like to know what my clients spend is a real key. So again, I've asked this question on hundreds of times this year to my clients. Do you know what your top clients or your top 10 clients are spending every year in recruitment? And in general, I get the answer is no, I don't. So we need to understand what that client spend is so we can understand how we can get more of that spend in our pocket. We need to understand that there are multiple sponsors in the client. And what we tend to do is we tend to influence the part of the marketplace that is already being told that they can buy, and they're buying recruitment today and tomorrow. Where what we need to be sort of doing is looking at developing the sponsorship level within the company that can take us to the people who make the decisions within the company. So we need multiple sponsors across our client, people of influence, people who can introduce you to the C-suite. And this is where we start to create a different relationship. This is why I say it's called level selling. So you as directors and the owners of the business and senior people within the business, you guys should be selling to the C-suite line, where your recruiters should be delivering to the recruitment line. So once we start to get and control that, we can start to control the marketplace even better. We need to know our external threats from our competitors, if I could say the word. What about their technology advancements? Is there technology that might replace you? What's their internal view like? The C-suite, the head of department, the finance, the legal, they're all people that could threaten you within the business, because you're not talking to the C-suite, but your competitor is. And I've seen this happen. You can suddenly lose a client that you thought you had a great relationship because you're not talking to the key people. So you've got to understand that you've got to understand your sponsorship development, level sell, and then look at the threat prevention to do that. And if we start to create that type of marketplace, then what we start to look when we look at our plans, we're not planning for tomorrow's recruitment and the next day's recruitment. We're looking at planning recruitment over a long period of time. So we become a true partner with the client, and therefore the client sees you as a prospect and not as a suspect. So your service, your data, your value needs to be constantly whet the client's appetite so they want to buy. And partnership goes both ways. And this is where what Paul's talking about, a dog, you might think you've got a great partnership, but they're actually treating you like a dog, or the client that you're working with isn't great. So partnership goes both ways. And you need to provide more than just a bum on a seat to your clients, and they need to provide to you more than just spot business and transactional business. And that's when we start to think, what does a win look like? And we need to consider, what does it look like from our point of view, and what's it look like from their point of view? Because sometimes we feel like we've got to win, but we never actually ask the client whether they've got to win. And if you ask the client, they might not think they've got to win at all. So again, it means that our service isn't good enough. It's just the same as everybody else. And if they feel like they're not getting a win, we're more likely going to be in that exclusive or that early stages of the recruitment process, where we need to be in partnership or advocacy to really move forward. So to learn how to plan, how to structure the plan for each individual client, constantly view the strategy, execute it, measure how the people like it, and look at constantly whether it's driving cash into your business. And this is where we start to look then at how we actually drive the cash into our business in a different fashion. And this is by compartmentalizing the recruitment process.
Thanks, H. So this is really an interesting slide, I think. This is essentially how you segment what we do for a living. Now, it's fair to say that the big corporates actually do this. I mean, Howard and I in the past, we worked for and ran big recruitment businesses, as you'll probably know. And what we often did was look at it from a different perspective. We looked at service offering as segmented. You can see here on contingency, which is what we all do. It's a free service. It's a no-win, no-fee situation. We're obviously also looking for exclusive opportunities with clients. We're driving our clients really hard into this space, exclusive and retained. But most agencies will do their level best to be working those first two spaces, contingent and exclusive. Getting people, particularly SMEs, to start moving beyond that point into retained, which you'll know is money up front. The typical retained model is 1/3 up front, 1/3 upon completion of the first interviews, and the final third upon the person starting is the typical fashion. There are other models that retained that where money is upfront, but it's a different style of split. But getting contingent recruiters to move towards this space is challenging. And then we get towards these next two areas, which most SMEs don't get into. But the big boys, the big players are into these spaces. They're into talent advisory, they're into RPO, MPS. And I think it's often felt by SMEs that, well, we can't do this. We don't have the tools or the knowledge or the experience to do this. Howard and I often say to our clients, you absolutely are in a position to do these things for your clients. There's no reason why you can't offer RPO services, mini RPO services, particularly to your rising stars, that is different in any way, shape, or form from what the big guys are doing. The difference, I think, is that from a front of brain perspective, the big corporates are very much aligned to offering these style of services which are segmented and are priced accordingly. Whereas what we tend to do, and we're going to look at this in a moment, is we tend to offer everything in a bit of a muddle, if you like. Here's our price. We do this, this, and this. And often the things we will offer to clients in our fee and our margin is a bit of a mishmash of some or all of these things. Whereas you'll find, and you're probably aware of this, that the people the big corporates you're up against will actually very consciously segment into these areas, and they'll bring in different sales teams to take care of these things. So when I worked for, I was heading Office Angels and Adecco board director, we were very much into having RPO style offerings and talent advisory offerings. And there was a price that was very different that the clients paid to the kind of services we offered when we were talking in terms of contingency or exclusive. Now, we know how to do this, Howard and I, and we often guide our clients in this direction. There is no reason at all, as far as we're concerned, that being a small business precludes you from getting close to your clients in the fashion that we've been describing, to the extent that you become trusted, and then you can start to talk about recruitment solutions, and you can start to look at pricing those solutions in a very itemized, selective, and customized fashion. And because we're going to run out of time and there's not enough time to go into in enormous detail today, we'll happily talk with you offline, and indeed when we see many of you, about this particular process. But this is something that I think that you should be very aware of, something that you can move towards. And if 2022 is a target for you in terms of changing your model, we would be more than pleased to discuss how you start that transition from being at the base end contingent to moving towards much more customized and segmented services. And I will add one last point. When we get into the top end of this particular slide, when we start to talk about retained talent advisory and RPO, it's often at decent premium margins, because clients will pay you for great solutions. They will be prepared to talk to you about the methods in which you can help them to solve their most challenging recruitment issues, particularly in this current candidate short market.
So I think when we start to think about that, then what we're starting to do is dispel that myth of what talent advisory actually is and what talent advisory services look like. And I think what we're saying is that, we probably do, this slide here is we started to write down everything we do as a big player, everything you do in a marketplace to provide a company for talent advisory, MSP, and moving into that RPO stage. And when you start to look at it, what you start to see is that actually an SME recruiter probably does most of these things. In fact, we probably do all of these things, or we have the capability of doing them. What we don't do very well is package them up to our client and sell them as a total package to our client. And that's what the big boys do very, very differently. They package it up. And the start of this process, when we start to talk about segmenting your client base, creating where each individual client is, looking at your job specs, looking at then are they from the Boston Matrix, and then creating the plan. That is the first step. So at least then what you have a strategy to go and aim at the clients. So if you look at talent acquisition strategies, are you talking to your client about their recruitment strategy, their workforce planning, their onboarding processes? We're pretty sure we are, because we talk to them about them every day. Do we talk about the cost of compliance? Do we have the rate card? Do we have a workforce audit, etc.? All of these things we do. We look at our technology. How easy would it be for us to create a microsite at the back of our website that our clients can access, and only our clients can access? We're doing video jobs, we're doing technology advisement, we're doing video job adverts, etc. So all of these things that we do individually. And what the art of selling is getting a client to understand our products and services and how they match their requirements and needs. The art of negotiation is then settling on a price. So if we start to take these things apart and start to look at how we can deliver these things to our clients, then guess what? We dispel that myth. We start to pitch talent advisory services and more, and guess what? We start to win, because we're already doing a vast majority of it already. We just aren't great at packaging it up. And that's where we start to take a big difference. We start to package it better and deliver it better. And that's when we can start to look at dispelling the myth a little bit on that RPO and MSP model.
Okay, so I'm being told my internet connection is unstable, so I hope you can still see me and hear me, okay? To pick up on Howard's point, when you start to look through and you pick through this slide, just about everything on here are things that you can provide, and you probably already do. We can provide to any client management information. We can brief, we get involved in briefing meetings. We already do those things. CVs listed to the hiring manager, working closely with hiring managers to identify candidates. Obviously, we're arranging interviews. We're working our way through the offers. We can definitely do more around onboarding and so on. We obviously, if we're dealing with contractors and temporary staff, we're doing all of those things as well. If you look around that sort of circle, that dartboard, there aren't many things in there that we are incapable of doing as an SME. Over on the right-hand side, you can see things like workforce planning, candidate attraction, sourcing channels, candidate assessment, onboarding and offboarding. And without wishing to go into every point, because we're clearly going to run out of time, the fact is that most of those things are things you already do. What Howard was saying earlier is we're not segmenting them. We're not offering them as different elements of the service that we provide. They do tend to get jumbled up. What we're saying to you is we need to be much more strategic about the way in which we approach clients, the way in which we take them from the base at the top, where we become a trusted advisor, as we were describing earlier, but also to identify where we are in the life cycle with that client, and how we can start to embed ourselves with the organizations that we work with to start to move towards much more advanced selling techniques, much better pricing models. And indeed, I think looking at what kind of people within our businesses are going to be engaged with those clients, and if necessary, and we've talked about this many times, bringing people in to work on site with clients, or part on site, off site with clients. There's a whole range of things that you can do. Many of you have done already, but you can do these in your own business. This point about dispelling the myth, MSP, RPO, that SMEs can't do this, it's absolute nonsense. Of course you can, but you do need to be able to promote and market yourselves in a way that's different very often from the way you've gone about it in the past. All of us need to move away from contingent recruitment to the best of our ability. It will always monopolize our market. There's no doubt about that. But I do think for many forward-thinking recruitment owners, this next year or so is going to be all about how can I move from almost 100% contingency towards perhaps getting 30% of my business in that area that is related to exclusive and retained. And I think also naturally leaning on the clients we already work with to give us more opportunities, but in this segmented, customized fashion. It's often said that 70% of our new business comes from 30% of our existing clients. And it's those existing clients that we need to talk to just to establish what we can do over and above what we've always done for them that will make a major difference in terms of the way they relate to us, and will make a major difference to us in terms of the business that we develop with them next year.
And when we sort of bring that to a conclusion, that's what we presented, and questions are starting to come in. So one of the questions has come in here, which, in your experience, how do you best reposition retained searches to get clients asking you to work retained as opposed to having to pitch them? So there's a couple of things there, Kaz, that I'd look at. Is, first of all, is if you just polish your contingency recruitment and try sell it as retained, then you're never ever going to get a client asking you to work a retained service. You have to completely differentiate the two, and therefore your website, your marketing, etc., also has to, spell that out, that there is a very difference between those two types of processes that goes on. The second side is when you start to sell to clients, they have to experience your capabilities of retained search. And I took one client from being 100% contingency over a 2-year period to being 60 to 70% retained. I took their average fees from 3,500 per placement to just short of 18K per placement. And what we did was we went out and started to sell directly to clients. And then once the client starts to understand the differentiation and they experience the process that we put into place, then they started to come back to us. But what they were doing is, because we compartmentalized our sale, as Paul talked about earlier, they were coming back, and when we were talking to them, we were saying, right, here are our 3 sales, here are our 4 sales, including talent advisory. What's best suits you? And they were going, what best suits us would be retained. We would then sell that retained process and pitch on that retained process, and probably 50% would then drive that down to exclusive, but 50% would stay retained. What we found was that both the exclusive and retained clients, when they came back a second time, would say, actually, can we have this as a retained service? And sometimes you have to be very open with clients and say, yes, we can have it as a retained service, but what I'm telling you is we can't find these people, so it's going to be a really long search. It might take you a long time. Or, yes, we have lots of these people. There's no point retaining it. We'll do it on an exclusive basis. So it's been open and honest. If you go to the big headhunters in the marketplace, they will tell clients, you're going to retain me just to search the marketplace, but we're telling you now to find that person might take a year, 18 months. And the clients have to understand that. So smaller clients, it's a bit of a leap of faith, but it is about you starting to pitch it first. And once they start to see the success, they will come back and start to pitch to you what they want. And then it's about you being honest with them and working from there. So it's important that we move. As Annette said, contingency is not dead. I was about to say contingency isn't dead. It is still a viable option, but we've got to start to think about other services that we can supply to our clients that tie our clients closely into us, which means we can take more wallet spend from the client and remove some of the threats that are coming into our marketplace, as in new technology and other recruiters, etc.
I think that's it. We've run out of time, H, as ever. Where does 45 minutes disappear to when your nose is bleeding? I have to ask you that question. It's been great, actually. Thoroughly enjoyed today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you've other questions, because this is a deep subject and it makes that point, I think feel free to connect with Howard and myself, or both of us, of course, and we'd be more than pleased to go into more depth around this subject. It's a really important one. Annette's point about contingency is not dead is absolutely true. It's not dead and it's not going to die. But we do want to be in a position where we start to talk to clients at a deeper level to truly understand what we can offer to them that will go over and above what we've offered them in the past. And this is the year for it. I mean, we are on the verge of 2022. It's planning now, making sure that we get in front of clients really urgently in the as we go towards Christmas and particularly in the new year, to start to understand their requirements in this very peculiar, unusual market. Lots to play for, and we're going to expect a great year ahead, but we definitely want to be looking at ourselves from a strategic positioning, as we've been discussing in the last 45 minutes.
I think Einstein said it, didn't he? If you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that's the definition of madness. So if you keep doing contingent recruitment and try push it up the line to become talent acquisition or talent advisory, etc., then you're not going to get different results. You're going to get perhaps worse results. So you have to differentiate yourself, I think, completely on that. So guys, thank you very much for your time. It's been much appreciated. Next week we'll be back. Hopefully more people will be back. Heather will be back from holiday, I think. She might be back from holiday. I don't know. Actually, that's an outrageous lie, so I shouldn't say that. But, you know, certainly Paul and Dave might be back. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. Enjoy the rest of the week. Mr. Jacobs, go sort your nose out. It's been a pleasure not watching you bleed for a change. Thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. See you next week.
Take care.